How to solve a quadratic using the quadratic formula. Step number 1. Your quadratic must be in general form. And general form is simply standard form equal to 0, or ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0. For example, x squared plus 5x plus 6 equal to 0 is ready to use the quadratic formula. But x squared plus 5x plus 10 equals to 4 is not ready to use the quadratic formula. We must first set this equal to 0. But by simply subtracting 4 from both sides, we can transform this quadratic that is not in general form into a quadratic that is in general form. Step number 2 is going to be identify the values of a, b, and c for the quadratic that you're working with. Now, this problem that I'm doing right here, the value of a, if there's not a number in front, remember Ninja 1, he's there even though you don't see him. A equals 1, b equals 5, c equals 6. Notice that all three of these numbers are positive, so that's why they're positive right here. But if I were solving the problem x squared minus 5x minus 6 equals 0, the value of a would be 1, but the value of b would be negative 5, and the value of c would be negative 6. So be sure when you identify the values of a, b, and c that you don't forget those negatives. Step number 3 says plug them in. Plug in these values for a, b, and c into the quadratic formula that you have memorized. Because you sing the song, right? Bumba 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 bumba. Plug them in, and when you plug them in, be sure you put parentheses around everything. Why? Because remember that problem a while ago where we had some negatives? If you don't put parentheses, you're going to mess up. Step number 4 says that we are going to simplify. After we've plugged all these numbers in, we're going to simplify and evaluate the discriminant. You may not have heard this word before. The discriminant is this number that's underneath the radical. You'll talk more about that later, but just know the vocabulary word right now. The discriminant is the number underneath the radical. So we want to simplify. I simplified by dropping the parentheses. I simplified right here by multiplying 2 times 1 and getting 2. And I ran and grabbed the Desmos scientific calculator right here, and I typed in the numbers that we calculate to find the value of the discriminant, b squared minus 4 times a times c, and the Desmos scientific calculator tells me that the value is 1. So I'm going to write a 1 underneath that radical. I lost my recording. Step number 5 says simplify the radical. So that means that if we can take the square root of the discriminant, then do that. And we can. The square root of 1 is 1. If you can't take the square root of 1, if it was a number like the square root of 8, then you have to simplify the square root of 8 by pulling out any perfect squares. If it's an I, if it has a negative number underneath there, you would pull out an I. You do whatever you need to do to simplify this radical. In this case, we simply have some numbers that we can now simplify into just regular numbers. So since I do have the ability to say negative 5 plus 1 and then negative 5 minus 1, I'm going to separate these two things because these will simplify. And once I have them separated, I can then simplify each one of the fractions. That's step number 6. So now that I have simplified each one of these fractions, I see that my two solutions are very nice integer values of negative 2 and negative 3. Which should tell you that your parabola, the graph of this quadratic, is going to cross the x-axis at negative 3 and negative 2.